like that. It's like all right, here we are with Rick Margitza and it's Paris to Japan today. Paris to Fukuoka, Japan. How about that?
So I
Rick was
should make a quick little correction. It's actually Margitza.
Margitza. I know that too.
No problem. I've gotten that. I've gotten much worse throughout my life, but that one's kind of a common one.
That's true. In my head, I always hear it that way, though. You told me before it's Margitza.
Yeah,
But how you doing today, man?
I'm okay. It's Saturday, gray, rainy Paris.
Right.
Kind of apropos for this time of year, but you know, still enjoying the lockdown.
So is a lockdown going on there?
Yeah, it's a partial lockdown, and they've been lifting certain restrictions. Uh, but we're going to be locked down through the first of the year. Like no, and it's actually good. They've been smart. There are no parties. Nobody's allowed out on New Year's Eve
Wow.
because that's like a potential for a super spreader. People are out there, whatever they're doing, and so I think that's kind of smart.
Yeah, that is
What about
good.
the situation there? What part of Japan are you in?
Right now we're in Fukuoka, Japan, down in Kishu, the Southern Island.
Huh?
That's where home base is, really. Sometimes I go back to Tokyo when I can. Um, they're kind of they've been keeping it under control here, but lately it's been on the rise. They're going ahead with New Year's and stuff like that. It's making people nervous, and they had a different program encouraging people to go out to boost the economy, and it's a little
Hmm.
different here. But of course, it never got this. No place has been like the United States, So
Yeah, it's gotten to the point where I can't even talk about it anymore. Anymore, it's so absurd what has happened.
yeah, I made a short trip there. I wasn't able to even travel back, you know, and it was very stressful. What can I say? I was. It was like I left one place and went back to a different place.
Yeah.
It
And
was,
this is the first Christmas I'm not going to go home in, 50 years or something. So,
hmm,
uh,
I
yeah,
get
I'm relieved. I'm going to miss my family, of course, but I'm relieved not to have to deal with that
right.
madness and possible exposure and all that, everything that it entails.
Wow. How is your family?
Immediate family is okay. There have been like some second and third cousins whose families got it, but they're also Trumpers and the non-maskers. So
Huh.
I don't know what they expected. But
Right.
what's interesting is after people in the family got it, and one of the older generation actually passed, I saw a gathering, and they're still not wearing masks. It's like they didn't learn the lesson even after somebody dying. So I don't know what it takes for people if that it's not going to change their behavior. It's sad.
Yeah. I understand. I understand. Um, I finally met Rick when I came to Paris to do something for Dario, what maybe was a year or two ago now or something. And I'd been a fan of your playing, and we had chatted online and all that. And it was fun to go see you. Who were you playing with? Was it Ben Sidran?
I think it was Ben. Yeah, Ben
That was
Sidran. I think, and his son Leo, who now kind of is part of his band, drummer, and and I think the bass player who's been working with him for a long time, and his name is escaping me right now. I'm embarrassed to say.
right.
But it's always fun. Usually he comes in every November and we play like 3 or 4 nights in a row.
Huh.
Obviously, it didn't happen this year, but it's always great to play with him.
Right. It was a nice gig. We had a lot of fun. My wife was with me, and the Dario event was a little strange because they had asked me to do a Count Basie thing. So I even tried arranging for small group two charts and stuff like that. And when I got there, they hadn't hired a piano player, and I, I said I, I said to the guy, I said I won't mention his name, but I said, Count Basie played piano, right? But they had a guitar player, and I actually just felt like not doing any bassy. I'd written before saying maybe we shouldn't do that and just call some tunes and.
Hmm.
But I enjoyed being in Paris, and it was nice to see you. It's it's hard to do Count Basie without a piano.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, well, what can you do, man? Anyway, look, man, we had a wonderful chat on the phone before, and you were telling me about your family. I'm gonna try to remember what I can. As you get older, I can't remember nothing. About someone who played on Charlie Parker with strings. You were talking about playing and meeting Miles Davis. I asked about what you practice. So I love everyone to hear all that. That was just wonderful, man.
Okay. I yeah. Why don't we start with I guess a little recap of my family history. My nationality and heritage is Eastern European Gypsy from Hungary on my father's side and from Czechoslovakia on my mother's side. And I say gypsy because it's definitely another language. And these are people that immigrated from India all across Europe.
Huh.
So you have Spanish gypsies, you have Russian gypsies, you have Romanian gypsies, Hungarian, and so forth. So the faction of Indians that ended up in Budapest and Czechoslovakia brought music with them because some of them were also like artisans and worked with horses, and some, each faction that moved to certain places carried a trade with them, and our people were musicians. So I grew up with basically everybody in the family playing music. My father's father was a Hungarian gypsy violinist, so I heard a lot of folk music with him growing up. And my father was a classical violinist
Huh.
who played violin in the Detroit Symphony, which is where I'm from, for almost 30 years.
Wow.
And he was also one of the violinists that was involved in all the Motown music because they used a nucleus of strings from the orchestra.
Huh.
So whenever you hear Stevie Wonder or Marvin Gaye or any of those Motown things with violins and cello, my father is one of the guys there. So that's also really cool because I grew up hearing a lot of that music in the house as well.
What's his name?
His name is Richard, same as me, Richard Margitza.
Wow, that's amazing.
And what's funny is every once in a while he still gets a royalty check from what's going on because he's one of the violinists on that track.
That's amazing, man.
So can you imagine what Marvin is getting or his family's getting? Because my dad, just one of the session guys, is still getting a check every once in a while.
Jeez.
And then my mother's father was a jazz musician. He played bass with Glenn Miller.
Right.
Excuse me. And he was also the cellist on Charlie Parker with strings.
Mm.
So that the cello solo at the beginning of Just Friends is actually my grandfather, which I'm always super proud to mention. Unfortunately, he died when I was really young, so I never had a chance to talk to him about it.
Oh, right.
So as a result of my mom, I heard a lot of jazz. So I heard jazz, classical, folk, and R&B, Stevie Wonder, Motown music growing up, which was a super cool way to grow up because there was no labels attached. It was just good music in the house. My father wanted me to become a classical musician, so I started playing violin when I was really young, and I switched to classical piano around, I guess, 9 years old, and it got to the point where I was in junior high, and you had to pick an instrument to be in the band because there wasn't a piano.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked clarinet and oboe because you couldn't play a saxophone yet. And then I heard Charlie Parker play because my mother said, "Would you like to hear your grandfather play?" So she put on Bird with Strings. And when I heard that, I went to the school like the next day and I kind of begged them to let me have a saxophone.
Wow.
And I came home and just started learning as much as I could by playing along with records. And a lot of my cousins and uncles all play music, so I would go and we would have little jam sessions, and I would just kind of learning to improvise and play by ear.
Right.
And so I grew up in Detroit and Dearborn, Michigan. And when I got to high school, we had a band director who was actually a pianist for a while with Cannonball, and he played with Neil Hefti. His name was Jack Pearson. So I got really into theory behind the music as a result of him. And he was also a huge fan of Lenny Tristano and Warren Marsh and that whole
Yeah.
school.
Right.
So I had some really good roots there because his whole thing was like, listen to these guys. They don't play cliche. They pay tribute to Bird, but they're
Right.
not trying to copy him. So, I had this kind of philosophy instilled for a long time. It's like, pay homage to the masters, but try to find your own individual style or voice or whatever that means. So, um,
And
that was,
that's quite a lineage, man. Jeez.
yeah,
No wonder you're
yeah.
such a badass cat.
Not,
Wow.
and
So
then, no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to quickly jump in with a comment. I've noticed that most of the greatest jazz musicians, when they were younger, were a lot of the oral learning was very important to them. Bill Crow and a young Jaleel Shaw even started young. And I, for me, everyone I've met who, and Bill Crow said there were no methods when he started. You learned a lot on the bandstand. You learned tunes from other people. You learned from buying records. How was your experience when you came up, in that aspect?
Well, yeah, cause like I'd grown up listening to it in the house because my mother was playing it all the time. But whenever we would go to weddings and parties and stuff, all of the younger musicians, because the older men played the gypsy music, which at that time didn't really affect me that much. But now when I listen to it, it has so much soul, and I realize that it's a big part of my
Huh.
musical foundation.
Right.
But a lot of the younger musicians were playing jazz and like kind of Stevie Wonder stuff, and so I grew up just listening to all that, and it made a huge influence because I would just go home and try to imitate what I heard and play along with records. And
Right.
yeah, this is I still had a turntable, so I had the turntable on 16, and I was just dropping the needle and learning phrase by phrase. And at some point, I did start writing everything out just because I'd like to see what it looked like. But
Wow.
um, yeah, at the beginning, it wasn't even a thing. It was like, yeah, I'm just learning these solos by ear, and I would come home from school and play along with the records,
So were
as
you
well.
playing in the school band and all that kind of thing? The marching band, concert band. What I mean? Did you do that
I
stuff?
had to deal with all of that. Yeah, the marching part of it was brutal.
I played clarinet in the marching band. I'm
Yeah.
curious. Did you think about writing out solos or parts on your own, or someone told you maybe you should write it down, or how that working?
Um, yeah, at some point, I had an older cousin. Her name was Laura, who was a drummer, and she played flute. And she first started getting into the Brecker Brothers and Chuck Mangione with Jerry Nywood. So she was kind of like my hero because she was like, a couple years older, and she was already in high school in the jazz band, and she was also getting downbeats. So I was looking at the magazines when I would go to her house, and then I saw the solos in the back when people used to submit transcription. So I
Oh,
started to see what they looked like, and that put the little bug in me. It's like I wanted to be able to do that, to write them out. And I also remember one Christmas, my mother got me like a calligraphy pen and a blank music book, and to me that was like heaven, just to look at that and just the feeling and the tactile sense of writing it was something that
huh,
made an impression on me.
right.
So yeah, so at that point, I mean, some of the solos that I already learned by ear, I said, okay, let me see if I could notate these. So that's kind of how it started.
Wow, that's good. And speaking of on that same thing, did you get the new Phil Woods book yet? The biography came out,
No.
and I got the Kindle and I've started reading it. It's really, of course, it's fascinating. And it's interesting how he learned music. There was such immersion in the music. It's just it's different than the way when we came up. Like it was kind of like Bill said. It was music was everywhere, and he happened to have a really great saxophone teacher, but it was playing with other guys, getting the records and transcribing the melodies they wanted to play in this little band.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a completely different way of you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and it seems I don't. This is maybe too general of a statement, but it's like people were hungrier back then because you couldn't just go on YouTube and hear everything and see everything. So I mean, that one record that I would get every week meant so much to me. as opposed to just, like I said, just going on YouTube and having access to everything, where it loses some of its power.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And it's I was just thinking about when I was a kid, how my mom took me to the library and they take 10 books out, and I'm supposed to
Hmm.
read them. Did you grow up like that?
Yeah, or the library in school, but also our library had a record collection, so that was a big thing to me because I was
Huh.
also still into classical music. So going there, and I was into Franz Liszt, so getting all this piano
Right.
concertos, and then
Right.
to come home with those records and sit in front of the record player and just look at the thing, that was like
Right. I
it was
get
like a
that.
ritual for me. Yeah.
My father only listened to classical music. For some reason, he'd abandoned jazz, and I didn't really get to hear much of it. But yeah, I understand that because I was trying to play clarinet. Um,
Mhm.
I can't remember who it was you were studying with. You went to University of Florida or Miami? I can't remember now.
Yeah, excuse me. So I'll do a brief recap of my scholastic history. I grew up in Detroit, so I went to Wayne State University for a semester and a half.
Right.
Studied with some really great local guys, and then I went from there to Berkeley for one semester in Boston, and
Oh, right.
that was before it turned into a corporation. But that's the first time I was really away from home. And at that point, I think Branford was there, Dave Kukowski, Jeff Watts, Danny Walsh, just like a nucleus of great players that
Wow.
were closer to my age. So as opposed to being exposed to the older guys in Detroit, it was like, wow, look at these guys are really dealing with it. So
Right.
that was really inspiring just to be around there. And I heard Berganzi for the first time live, and I heard Liebman for the first time live, and uh, so that was a life changing experience. So I was there for a semester, but I didn't really get that much out of being in the school itself. It was more just the environment of Boston and hearing all those guys play.
Right.
And then at that point, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And of all people, and this will come back in later down the line in the story, is my band director's Jack Pearson, his son. His name is Matt Pearson.
Oh,
Who ended up being a producer at Blue Note.
yeah.
Excuse me, but he was going to school at the University of Miami,
Uh-huh.
and he said, "Rick, this school is amazing. You should come down here and check it out."
Oh,
So, on his recommendation, I went to Miami for a couple semesters, and there are some amazing, amazing teachers, including Gary Campbell, and another nucleus of other amazing players who ended up going to New York. So, I kind of met a whole another society of musicians and learned a lot from being down there. But still didn't finish my degree. And while I was down there, I got a call to go to New Orleans to work, because some of my relatives in Detroit got a job working at the new Sheraton Hotel that opened. So
huh.
it was like, come down here. We got free rooms in the hotel. We're going to be playing jazz 6 nights a week in the lobby in New Orleans. So of course that was a no-brainer. So I left school, and when I went to New Orleans, I decided to finish my degree finally. So I graduated from Loyola University. I went to school there for another couple semesters. So I basically went to 4 schools to get a bachelor's of music.
Wow. how, how long did you? I'm curious. How long do you study with Gary? Because I've never met Gary, but you told me some of his history, and I know about his connection with Michael Brecker.
Yeah, Gary, it was just for a semester because he switched schools, but I was with him long enough to understand his concept of how to structure practicing. And, we've been in touch ever since then. So it's been kind of an ongoing thing, but like formally, it was for a semester.
Could you share with some of the folks and me what you learned about his structure of practicing?
Well, yeah, this is, I think I think he's written a book. I mean, a book about that. He's written a couple great books. One is called Expansions, and one is about triad pairs.
Yes, I've read.
And yeah, really, yeah, he's great, really thorough. Michael Brecker practiced with him. Supposedly, they kind of learned about practicing together. And Gary's thing, one of the main things is whatever you practice, uh, you should practice it in every combination of direction. So since I'm at a piano, I'll kind of just demonstrate. So if we
Okay.
just take something really simple like diatonic thirds in
Right.
C major.
Right.
So you eventually will set up this grid in your mind because there are eight steps to this process. So the first step is, I call it 1A, which means you're going to be playing whatever you're playing up as you go up. So that's 1A. So 1B means you still play the interval going up, but now you're coming down. Okay, so then 2A now would be you're playing the interval down, but you're going up. And then 2B is down as you go down. So 3 is now 1 up, 1 down. 3B is 1 down, 1 up as you descend. And then 4 is the opposite, down, up as you go up. And then 4 would be this is down, up as you descend. So those are the 4 directions, descending and ascending. So you could plug anything into that system diatonically. So you could do thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths within a scale and any type of scale. And you could also do the same thing with diatonic triads or seventh chords. So diatonic seventh chords, say 2A, remember, so 2 is coming down. As you go up the scale. And let's say like 4B. So 4B, remember, is down, up as you descend. So yeah. So that part of the practice is nothing creative. It's just kind of, I call it like learning the alphabet.
Right.
So you're really getting inside of every key in every direction. So that's a big part of it. And then the next step is something that is related to the Slaminsky book, which is dividing up the octave. And when you divide up the octave, you get what I call intervallic families. So if you divide up the octave into half steps, you get chromatic family, obviously. If you divide up the octave into whole steps, you get a whole tone family. And there are 2 sets of whole tones, one off of C, one off of C sharp, right? Because to get all 12 notes. If you divide up the octave into minor thirds, you get the diminished family, and there are 3 sets of those. And then you can divide up the octave into major thirds, and that's the whole tone or the augmented family,
Right.
And there are 4 sets of those. And then the next interval after that is a fourth, but it doesn't divide up the octave.
Right.
So any interval after a fourth belongs to one of those other groups. So a tritone is part of the diminished family, right?
Right.
A fifth is the same as a fourth, but in an inversion, right? A minor 6 is the same as a major third. Major 6 is the same as a minor third.
Right.
Minor 7th is the same as a whole step, and a major 7th is the same as a half step. So I realize I'm going through this stuff kind of quickly, but basically, so those are the intervallic families. So now we started working on is combining the intervallic families with the directions. So if we take something as simple as a triad, so now we're not thinking diatonically, we're thinking about the intervallic families. So say 1A is up half steps. Right? So that means step 4A is down up as you go up. So C. So you do major triads in half steps. Then the next step is major triads in whole steps. So you do the same thing, but now you're only going up 6 triads. Right, and then same thing with minor thirds. So say if we go step 2, which is down, in minor thirds. So C, E flat, F sharp, A. and then the next thing would be major triads in major thirds. So if we want to go 3A, so that's up, down.
Like that one.
And you have to do major triads 4 times to get all 12 keys. So in a nutshell, that's what I worked on with Gary. And then what happens is you just start plugging in more sophisticated things into that system. So instead of a triad, it could be, or let's do something, it could be a 5-note thing. So now you do that up and down in half steps, whole steps, major thirds, minor thirds. So major thirds. And what this does is it gives you the ability to move things around when you're improvising. So obviously the pitfall of this is that you could sound like you're playing patterns. So the thing is, you want to use this as a tool to develop some combinations of tonalities that you may not have thought about, and then kind of develop that into a natural sounding idea, for example.
Right. You explained that quite well. I remember meeting one of the cats years ago, because I didn't have some of that kind of instruction for some of my teachers like that. And George Coleman teaches, he teaches many of those patterns you just played, but his description of doing it is a different way of looking at it. Mm-hmm. At any rate, I can't remember I know you know the cat from University of Miami. He's been in New York a long time, super bad player, and I just can't think of his name. But he was warming up on something like that one day. And every time I hear somebody play something, I always would go, "What does that mean?" You know. He gave me a few of those diatonic things, which I continued to practice for the last 20 years or maybe so. And I know you know him, and I just can't think of his name, man.
Not Andy Schnitzer, no.
No, it wasn't Andy Schnitzer. I just can't. I know the guy. I can see him in front of me, and he did a lot of pop gigs. You know, he had some gigs, and strong player. But he was down at University of Miami, probably around our age. You know, so. But it's not important. But that always gave me things to practice. But I'm amazed at your grasp of the material and the way you can teach it. You know, and I guess you realize probably it seems every teacher, whether it's Lee Konitz, Bob Mincer, George Coleman, super bad cats, have a different way of presenting material. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And some obviously are more clear than others. Some great players are not necessarily great teachers.
That's true.
I've been lucky enough to have been around around Dave Liebman a lot, and he is a master teacher because he could go in and convey information to a room of non-musicians and talk to them at that level, or doctoral thesis students and talk on that. He has that ability to communicate really clearly his ideas.
So I do agree with that. Every time I've watched some of his videos, he explains it so clearly. For instance, when he was talking about playing outside of a chord and using triads, and he simply had the audience member pick 3 triads on a vamp, which he then demonstrated by playing slowly, outlining the triads at first and then making it more complicated. His explanation was so clear, how we could use 3 triads to end up sounding like we're playing atonal outside of the chord.
Yeah, I call him Yoda. and he knows that. He likes the fact that I call him Yoda.
Yeah, he really is it is a gift. You're right about that. Some people can't explain it. I know people who studied with Joe Henderson, and I guess it depends on the student. Greg Fishman said he learned a great deal from Joe Henderson. And do you know anything about Joe Henderson's style of teaching or playing or technique?
No, I just heard a couple of stories where a student would be in his basement and Joe would say, "Okay, just warm up." And Joe would go upstairs and the student would hear the back door close. So Joe just left him in the house for like an hour or something without any explanation. So I've heard some stories more towards that side of it than him being a very articulate, disciplined kind of teacher.
I know Doug Miller studied with him in California. Doug Miller played in the bass. He's been a bassy man for a long time,
Hmm.
and Joe actually taught Doug a lot of those diatonic kind of things, and you can hear it in his solos. You know, you can hear
Hmm.
it the way he's moving through different patterns and shifting them, and that was one of the biggest things that Doug told me that Joe showed him. It was very similar to what you did, and I hear it in Joe's solos. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
but I know he was quite a character. I understand from what people tell me. I love his playing. I find his sense of time to be just incredible. I can't
It's
really find a record where he's not locked in to the perfect spot where I wish I could be. You know,
yes, it's incredible. And as out as it gets, or as floaty it gets, when he brings it back in, it's so without question that he knew exactly where he was all the time and just felt it. And yeah, it's extraordinary.
it is extraordinary. It's amazing. Um, I wanted to have people hear about what you told me about Miles Davis, of course. You described
Well,
to me you were getting some record deals, things were looking good. This is when there was a music industry. You remember those days and stuff, and then about how you got with Miles and all
yeah, well, okay. So I was living in New Orleans at the time, and I always, of course, my objective was to get to New York. And one kind of good thing is I got to New York when I was 26. So it felt I was like a little late, but all my friends from Boston and Miami were already there. So I kind of had a little bit of a reputation before I moved there. So that actually helped. It wasn't something that I planned, but that helped.
that.
And the man I mentioned earlier, Matt Pearson, uh, so we were roommates at the University of Miami, and his father was my band director. So we go back a long time. He got a job as an intern at Blue Note Records. So he called me in New Orleans and said, "Look, put together a demo tape because I could get it to Bruce Lundvall, who was the then president of Blue Note."
Well, that's right.
So I put some live stuff on this tape from a couple of things, and then I went into the studio and recorded a couple tunes and sent it to Matt. And Matt also, unbeknownst to me, sent that tape to Tommy LaPuma, who was in the studio recording Amandla with Miles.
Huh.
So uh, Matt called me and said, "I played the tape for Bruce, and he said he wants to sign you." So just that in itself was pretty amazing to get a record deal just through a connection at the record company. Um, but in the meantime, it was maybe a month or two had gone by, and I got a call from Tommy LaPuma, who said, "Rick, I had this tape. It was in my office for a while. I'm sorry we didn't listen to it for a long time." And he said, "I just listened to it and played it for Miles over the telephone." And he said, Miles told me to tell you that you have a job."
Huh.
So that's how that happened. And I was like, it felt like it was a joke or something, but it
All
was
right.
pretty amazing. So
What'd you put
yeah,
on?
so
What you play on the tape, man? I want you.
no, everybody's asked me that whenever I tell the story. I don't remember, except that I remember there was one night we were at a club in Detroit, and it was just a live version of me playing softly,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess it was a good moment. There was a blues on there, and then I recorded a couple of my tunes in New Orleans that were a little bit more kind of Pat Metheny-ish, but I was playing over them. So yeah, I would like to find that tape and listen to it now and see what's really on there. I have it somewhere.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, so that was amazing. He said Miles wants to meet you. So uh, I flew to New York, and I was telling my friend the other day, I don't remember anything about who I flew with, if I went with my girlfriend, if I flew myself, where did I stay? Was I in a hotel? I don't like nothing. It's a complete blank, except I remember going to Miles' apartment, and he had an apartment on Central Park South at the Essex House, which is a hotel, but he hadn't, they obviously people live in the hotel, and he had two rooms with a wall knocked down, so it was a huge space. And on the door was a sign that said, "Please take off your shoes." So I stood there with my horn and my shoes for like 15 minutes before I finally had the courage to knock on the door. I wasn't sure if he was going to ask me to play, or you hear all these horror stories about him, whatever. So anyway, he answered the door. I always remember this. He had a pair of leather pants on, no shirt, and he had a smile on his face that put me at ease immediately. It was like my dad or something. It was so amazing. And he said, "Where the fuck do you learn to play like that?" And I said, "I've been listening to you." So so we hit it off. I mean, it was really cool. He invited me in, and remember, he had this huge walk-in closet. And he comes out. He says, "I have all these fucking clothes, and I can't find a shirt to wear." You know. Uh, and then he went to a table. There's a big dining room table with a bunch of clutter on it, and he was looking through some cassettes, and he found two cassettes, and he just gave them to me, and he said, "I'll see you on stage."
Huh.
So no rehearsal, nothing. And at this point, Kenny Garrett was still in the band. The idea was to have two saxophonists. And I had seen that show several times over the last couple of years, so I kind of knew how things worked, and it was that same structure. So I just transcribed a couple of melodies, so I was ready to go.
Right.
And we did one gig in Stockholm, and after the concert, Miles fainted. He collapsed because he was not in good health. And he came up to me the next morning. We were getting on the bus, and he said, "I'm sorry, Rick." He said, "It's too much energy for me to have an extra person on stage right now." He said, "So I'll call you when Kenny leaves."
Huh.
So I went out, played one gig, and flew back to New York. And I was like, what just happened?
Yeah.
Like a week later, I was playing a wedding in New Jersey or something. It's like, did I just play with my
What year was that, man? Do you remember?
1989?
Oh,
So I was home for a couple months, and I got a call and it was actually from Miles, and he said, "Kenny just left. We need you." Apparently, they're at the airport, and Kenny wanted more money at the last minute, and they said no. So he just took his stuff and left. Uh, so I had like 3 or 4 days to get ready, cancel a lot of gigs, blah blah blah, and went out, and like the irony of life, it's like the first gig we played was also in Stockholm. It was where we left off my last tour,
right.
and that was when I played with him. It was like a 6 week tour in the summer of '89,
Huh.
and of course I wish it would have gone on longer. The next tour was supposed to happen starting in October, like the following fall.
Right.
And I had already signed a contract to do a gig as a result of my album release for Blue Note.
Right.
And it was in Japan, and I couldn't get out of it. And I went to Miles, and he says, "Don't worry about it. You got to do it." He said, "We'll get Gary Thomas or somebody to fill in for you, and you just meet us so and so place." But in the meantime, Kenny called and said he wanted to come back. So I don't know if I would have lost the gig if I wouldn't have taken off that, or if that would have happened regardless. So, that's one of those things I'll never know. So
Right.
I always wish, of course, it was longer, but I got six weeks with him.
Was it 6 weeks or 6 months? Just 6 weeks?
6 weeks.
That's it?
Yeah. Did I say 6 months? I wish it was 6 months.
I thought you said
Yeah.
six.
It was just a long summer tour in the summer of '89. Yeah.
Yeah, man, but you were kind of on top of the world, man. I thought you also told me you had an offer for another record deal too from somebody else.
Well,
Columbia
that
was?
happened. Yeah. Because when Tommy LaPuma called me to tell me about Miles, he said, "I listened to the tape. You sound great." He said, "It's too bad that you've signed with Blue Note, because we would have loved to have had your Warners." And I said, "Well, I didn't sign anything yet."
Huh.
So at that point, this is even before I'd moved to New York. It's like I had Blue Note and Warner Brothers kind of bidding against each other for me.
Right.
And I mean, I was so young and naive, I didn't even realize how amazing that really was. And I guess I'm glad it happened to me when I was that young, in a way. But I ended up deciding Blue Note because of my friend Matt and our alliance, and also because of what Blue Note stood for in terms of its history.
And that's the record of yours, I think, called "This Is New," which I told you about, where I transcribed a lot of your stuff off of that. And you told me a lot of people like that record. And I was listening to geez, who was it? I can't remember. See, this is what happens, man. It starts to happen. It was someone discussing music, and a great, great player, Eddie Daniels. I was listening to Eddie Daniels. all this Corona time of watching all these things, and
Mhm.
Eddie seems like one of those obsessive cats, man, about his practice. I don't know if I've never met Eddie. I've heard all sorts of stories. His playing is over the top on no matter what he studies, man.
It's extraordinary. Yeah.
But he was just mentioning, and I agree with this. He said he found he didn't need to buy 20 records of somebody. He would get one record, maybe pick one track or something like that, and he would really study, though, immerse himself in that part of the person. And he said,
Hmm.
and I agree with this, that he could learn the person's playing from if you find one good, recording of them. And he thought a lot of people would get all these records and try to do so much. It's better to focus. And I remember listening to your records, and I'll be honest with you, I picked off some of your licks. I still play them, but I didn't
Hmm.
have the background of the explanation of how you got to them until we met and you started explaining this the concept to me.
Yeah. I agree. That's one thing Liebman says is pick one or two, like, pristine examples of each player and really get into them. And maybe for certain people, it's different periods. So for Train, I would say, you need to pick a prestige record, but then there's also the Atlantic period, and then there's Impulse, because
Right.
somebody like him, there are almost three different players. So to immerse yourself in that kind of
Right.
detail, um, and like, yeah, but I agree. It's like there's a phrase. I know it's not going to come now, but having to do with like focusing on one thing instead of being too spread out with too many options.
No, no, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I just I actually just did, believe it or not, one of these sessions this morning with Branford Marcellus. So,
Really?
my second one today, yeah, and
Oh,
then
cool.
he was sharing some of his concepts with me, and the audience. I wanted to ask more about what did you learn from Miles? What was he like on stage? Did he tell you what to play? Was it joyful? Look, honestly, obviously, he's one of all of our heroes, and
Hmm. Hmm.
I watched that movie. What's that movie that just came out about his life?
Oh yeah. The Birth
Birth
of
of
the Cool.
Man, that was a moving movie, man. I think I
That's the
watched.
one that's on Netflix. Birth of the Cool.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, we just watched it the other night for the second time. It was really extraordinary.
Okay, after you
Yeah.
watch the movie and your experience, can you share with us what you learned from Miles? What goes on when you're around Miles Davis?
Well, I didn't talk that much to him because I was afraid of saying something stupid. And I'm sure if I would have had more than 6 weeks with him, I would have gotten into more of a relationship with him. I also realized that I got with him at a point in his life when he was a little mellower. So it wasn't kind of like, the angry militant Miles that everybody was afraid of. He was definitely mellowed, but he also wasn't in the best of health. So you can kind of knew when to pick your moments in terms of talking to him or not. Um, let's see how we could break this down. Um,
Did you got any good stories? Eating lunch with Miles, sharing a drink, and talking about women, anything?
yeah,
You
well, for sure. He kept himself separate, so there was no real socializing,
huh,
except maybe at the airport before we got on a flight. But he was, always sitting probably in business, and we were in the back. And whenever we'd get to the airport, he would be off, and he would stay in a different hotel sometimes. So there was never that part of it. Um, but one morning at the airport, because we were playing a slow blues every night,
huh.
and I had the courage to go up to him and I said, Miles, I said, I don't know what to play over the blues. I feel so corny. And he said, corny ain't in you. He says, don't worry about it. You couldn't play corny if you wanted to. But he said, think about it in three. So if you have a tempo, think about it. So if you subdivide triplets, then you're thinking about playing a waltz. So all of a sudden, there's not this huge amount of space between each beat because you're subdividing, and that made a huge difference to me.
That's heavy.
So that was one good thing. There was he would have this ritual of calling somebody into his dressing room almost every night before the gig, and usually it was to give them shit or to say something about something. You know, it wasn't I wouldn't want to say it wasn't always negative, but it was, it was some type of criticism. So he called me in finally once, and I was like, oh shit, what is he going to say? And all he said was, your fingers are coming up too high. Because when I play, I tend to play like, like high fingers instead of keeping them close. So that was amazing, just the fact that he noticed something saxophone technique related.
Right.
And it's true, you waste a lot of energy if you don't keep your fingers close. So I made the mistake of talking back, and I said, you're so right. I said, I had a lesson once when I was young with Sonny Stitt, and Sonny said, keep your fingers close. So he put his arm around me, said, oh, Sonny, I miss him, said, and that was it. He said, I'll see you on stage. So he then, like 5 minutes later, he calls me back in, and he says, since you like Sonny Stitt so much, why don't you try playing more like him? So what the fuck does that mean? Like over one chord vamps, play like Sonny Stitt? It's like, that was, he got me thinking. But so that's one encounter I had. I did notice that, of course, we always talk about Miles being the master of space. And, we were playing these one chord vamps that would go on for a while. So when it would come when it came time for his solo, he had a cordless mic. So he would be walking around the stage, and maybe a couple minutes would go by before he would even play a note. And then there were some times when he would pick up the trumpet and pretend like he was going to play and then didn't play something. So he created all this drama and tension by not playing. And everybody in the audience was just like looking like what is he going to do? So when he would finally play one note or one phrase, it was like such a relief. And usually it was so beautiful that it was, so he just knew how to create tension and control the moment in a really dramatic way.
I got to see
And
that band once in Pittsburgh. He played what's called Carnegie Hall in Pittsburgh. No, not Carnegie. Stanley Theater. Stanley Theater.
Mhm.
I think I didn't know any of the guys who they were at that time. I actually think if someone posted something about it, I think Marcus Miller been playing in the
Mhm.
band, or maybe Bob Berg. I don't even remember now, but it was really a wonderful experience seeing him. Plus, he seemed to be having fun. I'd heard so much times that he was angry or something, but he was walking around and he's smiling at people who come up to the edge of the stage and play. And
Mhm.
it was just such a polished control of the audience. I just remember just as a kid, just like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I learned is he would not play completely differently from night to night. He had certain things that he would use, but always in different places. So this idea of developing a vocabulary and manipulating it and placing it. Like Bird. You listen to some of the Bird stuff. He's not playing completely new things every time,
No,
but they're in different places all the time.
right.
So this idea of having control of your language and placing it, I really learned that from him.
Hmm.
And being aware of what you're playing. Because one night also during the slow blues, it was around the turnaround, and he played like a double time Clifford Brown sounding thing that I'd never heard him play before. So I got the gig tape and I transcribed it. And I think the next night I tried to play it, and I didn't really play it. So I was standing next to him during the guitar solo or something. And I said, Miles, I said, I just tried to play some of your shit from the other night, and I didn't. And I said, I messed it up. And he kind of laughed. Um, and the next day during the blues solo, he walked up to me and he played it again.
That's
Like,
some
here it is again.
that's old school right there, right?
Exactly. And so this idea, like, he was aware of what he was playing. It wasn't completely just improvising stuff out of thin air. It's like, stuff that you worked on, that you can control, that you can place. Um,
Yeah, I always tell people because and I've spoken with trumpet players because there's sometimes on YouTube you see people talking about, oh, Miles Davis was not a virtuoso, and I said, have you ever tried to play some of the stuff he played? Because even on saxophone, when you really pick off what he's playing, even especially in the '60s when he was running some of that chromatic stuff, and he knew
Yeah,
what it was he was playing. There was no, this is a mistake. It was so ridiculously accurate, and then the
yeah,
way he changed the sound of each note, it was a color, it was a texture. To me, he was playing more than the saxophone players, man. I mean,
yeah, yeah. I agree.
wow. I talked to Tim Momet. I don't know, Tim Momet?
Mhm.
He was telling me, man, anyone that says Miles stuff that doesn't have much technique, they really haven't studied.
They
He
listen, yeah,
told me
they're
Art
listening to the
Farmer
wrong
said,
stuff.
but Art Farmer said Miles invents technique. Some people have technique, but Miles invents technique. Man, that's you told me that there's only two times I think on YouTube that I've seen you playing in a video with Miles. Is that right?
I think there's a third one. There's definitely the one in Montreux. Um, then there's one in um, Perugia, I think, and there's one might be one in Nice. So those are three that I'm aware of.
There's
And
one that I enjoyed so much after my conversation with you that I trimmed it, edited down your solo, and I played it on repeat on Apple Music maybe for an hour.
oh,
I sent it to my friend who went to Berkeley too, and it's just a wonderful solo, man. And plus, it looks like Miles is really enjoying what you're doing. I really thought the two of you had a thing, and I was a little sad that it didn't go longer to go where it might have gone. But
yeah.
that's
There's one of them. There's one of them because usually the solo started with him coming up to me and us playing back and forth,
right.
and then he would let me go. And a lot of times when I've heard him do this with like the guitar player, for example, Miles would play something and the guitar player would always just try to imitate what he played, which to me didn't make sense. I was like, let's have a conversation. So I would always try to play something that actually kind of answered him instead of just repeated what he played. And there's one where he played something and then I played something that was so stupid that I just laughed. I was laughing at myself, but somebody watched that with me and said, "Why are you laughing at Miles?" And I said, "No, I was not laughing at Miles. I was laughing at my own ineptitude."
I get it. Man, that's such a great memory, man. I got that's just. I do wish you had made a recording or something with him. I know you probably did too, because I'd really, I listened to Bob Berg and Bill Evans and a lot of cats he went through, but there was something special because you seemed like you found a way to communicate with him in a different way. Bob is such a power player.
Yeah, one of the kind of disappointing parts is that to me personally, the first band with Marcus and Stern and Bill Evans, that was like, and Al Foster and Miles just came out that was so fresh sounding, and
Right.
that made a huge impact on me. So of course I'm a huge Bob Berg fan, but I'm not as much of his playing during that period with Miles. So anyway, when I got into band, I kind of thought or wanted to get back to that first band kind of feeling, and the personnel had changed, and it wasn't that type of interactive uh, situation anymore. So when I listen back to those videos or watch them, it's like I'm playing way too much because I'm trying to force what I wanted it to be instead of maybe leaving a little bit more space, being a little bit more organic in that that specific context.
I understand, but it was only 6 weeks after you were trying to digest it all so quickly, and when did Miles pass after that? I can't remember what year it was. When did he pass?
Uh, we should know that. I think it was 92 or something.
It
It
wasn't
wasn't.
much longer, right?
It wasn't much longer. I do remember this that he had a 60th birthday party at Central Park. They rented the boathouse and locked the park up, and I was invited, and that was a highlight just to to go to that party and be part of that. And I just walked up and I said, "Happy birthday, Miles." I said, "Are you ready for another 60 more?" And he just looked at me and said, "Shit."
Man, that just so Branford and I were talking about today, and with someone else, because there's so many people with such great technique now that that many of us, like myself, will never reach that level of technique. But I find myself not enjoying the music as much, and it seems to be about the heart when you touch people's hearts. And Miles learned what not to play and how to tell a story and how to bring the emotion or the color. And by the time we got the kind of blue and all of that different stuff, man, and he would change his playing to, how can I explain what I'm trying to say? But I could still, I probably like you, and probably like most cats I talk to, we've listened to some Coltrane records, some Miles records. How many times? 200 times? You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? And every
easily.
time, right? It's fresh, right?
Hmm. Yeah, there's not a moment that I don't put Train on and feel like it's like I'm listening to it for the first time. It's that it strikes in that real of a place.
So I really think it had a lot to do with the experience of the kind of almost like classical music. There's different bursts of periods where classical music was so creative, and honestly, I don't think it's ever been able to recreate that again. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like parallel things, were happening in painting and in poetry. I don't know if have you ever seen any of the Leonard Bernstein, the Harvard Norton Harvard lectures? It's
Yes, I am.
six,
Yeah,
and the way he talks about the progression of each discipline, so he's talking about the turn of the century and what's happening in art and literature and poetry and music, because it's something that's happening in the world, like it's leading up to World War I. So
right.
there's something in the collective. Yeah, so I agree. So if you're thinking about jazz in the 50s and 60s and the racial tension and everything like that, it was a reflection of society. uh, so I mean, it's really hard to judge what we're going through now. I mean, pre-COVID, it's like let's move it back a little bit.
Right.
If the music is as vital, is it communicating something that is as vital as what was going on in the 60s, for example? I
Right.
mean, I know that's a real general kind of question, but I think that's part of what we're hearing when we hear these guys play.
And for some reason, I've noticed, it seems like there's these periods of creation throughout civilization, and we can't really recreate that time. Um, you know, and as I mentioned before, when you read, Phil has some. I didn't get to that part, but Phil has some interesting things to say about Coltrane, and everyone has a different opinion about things. And my friend was wondering, basically he said, and I understand what Phil meant. He said that he felt that Sonny Rollins was one of the most creative musicians of the time, and he thought that Coltrane had more of a method of what he was going through, and sometimes, which I agree, and I won't say what he said in the book,
Hmm.
but at the same time, as you said, Coltrane made these records in these time periods, as you said, three different Coltranes basically in what 10 years I think it was.
Yeah, yeah, crazy.
And I can still listen to Coltrane's sound or my favorite things, whatever it is, and like you said, it's like the first time I listened to it.
Yeah, Coltrane sound is one of my favorite ones.
Me too. And when he made those records, it's like a complete story, like a book, you know.
Yeah, and then like yesterday we put on. I'm sure you've heard the live version of Autumn Leaves in Graz, Austria, where
Hmm.
he's playing it on soprano.
Yeah,
You've heard that one, right?
I think so. I'm going to go review it after we talk.
Check that one out if you haven't. So I haven't heard that in several months, and to put that on again, it was just like literally like going to church. It was like stunningly powerful,
Wow.
because they completely invented a new way to play.
I think that's the, how can I say, Phil seemed to be implying the in his in that Sonny Rollins was really more of a creative player, but Coltrane changed the future, and that's a much different.
Yeah.
Maybe Michael Brecker without John Coltrane, and I didn't know Michael Brecker very well, but he was very nice and spoke to me on the phone. I met him, and he lived in Westchester. You know, he liked to talk on the phone, and I always learned a lot. And it,
Hmm.
he was one of those cats that like, well, why are you listening to me? You should listen to Train. You
Right. Sure.
know. But did you know Michael Brecker very well, or
I did. I don't know really well, not as well as I would like to have, but funny story. The way we met is I was my first year of college in Detroit at Wayne State. Um, at this point, I was just a Michael Brecker and Coltrane head, but mainly Michael, and I had a stack of solos that I had transcribed. So our college big band uh, found out that we were going to Montreux for the jazz festival in Switzerland and a couple other places. We were going to do a little European tour, so that was an incredible experience for us. And then we looked on the bill and we found out that the Brecker brothers were going to be on tour on some of the same festivals.
right?
So I had a friend of mine, trumpet player named Simon Austin, and we were both Michael heads. And I said, Simon, he's going to be there. So I was walking around Switzerland in Montreux. It's a pretty small town, that one stretch that goes between the casino and the hotel, with the solos in my bag in case I would run into him. And one day I look down and I see him walking towards us. I said, Simon, there he is. So I walked up to him and I just said, Mr. Brecker, I have these. And he opened them and looked at them. And his sense of humor is, he looked at me and says, wow, you're really into this shit, aren't you?
That's good.
And then he said, if you're not doing anything tomorrow afternoon, why don't you come up to my room for a lesson? I didn't ask him for a lesson. He invited me up, and there was no mention of money or anything. He was just so generous with his time. And I don't know about you, but when you're out on the road and you have an afternoon free, that time is like sacred. It's like, that time is for me. And to just give it up to somebody and have him come up to the room. And so ever since then, he's been a huge ally. He introduced me to Chick and recommending me for some gigs, and was always really supportive. And yeah, I cherish the relationship we had.
That's
But
amazing.
very humble, very humble.
He was really humble and really nice to me. You know, we met. I'm a road dog, man. It was Lionel Hampton, Boquito de Rivera, and then Basie for years, man. So I know what you're talking about, man. Sometimes I just like to go to the hotel room and just sit in the room, man.
Yeah,
You know?
sure, of course.
People always like, "You're so lucky to be traveling all over." I'm getting up at 2 a.m. in the morning, man. You never even go to sleep, man.
Oh
You know what
man,
I mean?
checking into a hotel with a big band.
Oh, geez, bro. People don't know, man. People don't know. But that's the funny thing about Phil was when he said, hey, I'm going to go to music school. So you want to be a musician? Okay, let's all get outside. Let's get on this bus. We're going to ride around for 6 hours, and we're going to get off the bus. And we're going to get back on the bus again and ride around another 6 hours.
That
That was
should be a class.
that's, that's really it, man. When I was first playing with Lionel Hampton's band, and look, I was so ecstatic to have a gig with Lionel Hampton, man. 1990 New Year's Eve. They called me to play baritone sax, and of course I said, yeah, I play baritone sax. It was fortunate Nathan Davis had me play all of the instruments. Basically, he told me, and he was right. The music industry was changing. This is like
Hmm.
around 1981, and he said, you really like bebop, but you need to work too. It's
Yeah,
gonna be hard. So he gave me soprano, and then he gave me a tenor, and then he gave me baritone. It was a very wise thing to do. When I
yeah,
got
yeah.
to Connecticut, I got a tenor, and I got some gigs playing club days. Anyway, so it was Nina Simone on the first gig, and then they called me back to go to Europe, and we landed in Europe in Stockholm, and at the castle. I know you've been to Stockholm at the castle, right?
Hmm.
And Freddie Cole was playing the first night, man. This is my first time ever in Europe, man. I was just, I just, what can I say, man? It was like heaven
That's
for me.
amazing.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
So we had a jam session with Freddie and hanging out, and So yeah,
There's a couple videos of Sonny, and I think they've actually just released it in a CD live in Denmark or something. And one of them is the one we watched the other day is with Pete LaRocca and Henry Grimes on bass. And I could see what Phil means about Sonny because his shit is so extraordinarily creative and so inventive, and there's humor to it, and it's definitely. You can't say it's ridiculous. You can't say it's better than Train, but it is as good as Train in terms of what he's doing. And
I
more
agree.
musical, I don't know, but maybe not as spiritual as what Train was doing. It doesn't affect you here, but it affects you in like just it makes you happy, and it's also it's yeah, it was extraordinary. Can't think
I,
of another word.
I actually agree. Sonny is live at the Village Vanguard with the trio. Man, is my stuff, man.
Yeah,
Sonny was amazingly creative, and he had to find that style on his own coming out of Bird and that stuff, and he was always spontaneous and always humorous, and it left you filled with joy. and
exactly.
and I don't really like to compare. It would be like me looking at Bach and Beethoven and you know any composer and trying to each one's giving me a different message is what I'm saying.
Exactly. Sure.
And each one to me is a tremendous musician expressing their art. So jazz, unfortunately, I like pop, I like rock, I like country. It's hard to say unless someone can't mechanically play their instrument. I'm not really gonna dog them out. You know what I mean? Jackie Kelso said to me, he said, I've never met a bad musician. And Jackie was a superstar in the recording industry. I mean, this is a guy worth millions of dollars, and I knew what he was saying.
Mhm.
It's more of a spiritual concept, I think.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's as a result of universities and competitions and that whole mentality, it's definitely. But I guess even during the bebop years, there were these cutting sessions. So there was always this thing as who's the best.
Right.
Maybe that's a human nature kind of thing to want to put people into categories, but it's really it's it. I don't see the benefit of it.
I don't see the benefit of it either, and because I like listening to Chicago, the Eagles, Parliament, James Brown, man, and I see a lot of jazz cats are like, I don't listen to the Beatles, man,
No.
you
I
know,
mean, there's certain stuff like, Rolling Stones. I'm not a fan, but I give it up because I know that they're an iconic and they've changed music. It's personal taste, but I don't say they're bad.
right,
Obviously, I'd rather listen to Marvin Gaye or that kind of side
right,
of pop. I love Gino Vanelli, Earth,
right,
Wind and Fire.
right. Yeah, but basically, music's moving people's hearts, and I think if we criticize music or even a musician that other people are enjoying, I feel we're taking their joy. And I even defend Kenny G, man. I mean, he's a nice cat if you talk to him. He's a human being. He's not a
Yeah,
thing. You know what I mean?
exactly.
And I get tired of people putting Kenny G down. Besides, there's a lot of people that enjoy Kenny G. And he makes fun of himself. He doesn't take himself seriously. You know what I'm
Right,
saying?
right, right.
But I don't want to take the joy from those people who like listening to Kenny G. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. I think, and people who criticize him, there's also probably some jealousy involved. I wish I had as much money as he did. I mean, whatever it is, it comes from our own insecurities, I think.
Right, right.
Now, if there's somebody who's kind of a bad guy, then yeah, I can't think of a name, but then I wouldn't dog him, but I'm not going to even like pay him any attention. Um,
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
but then you think about somebody like Stan Getz, who I heard was not a very nice man, but he made such beautiful music. So you know, I don't know how you even try to separate stuff like that. Or
Well, I did an interview with Bill Crow. You know Bill Crow, don't you? The bass player.
mm,
And he worked with Getz a lot. And then at the end of Getz, it's towards when Getz stopped drinking, he went through that thing where you got to go apologize to everybody and stuff.
Wow.
he was he was saying, "This is taking too fucking long, man."
Oh, that's hilarious.
You know? So he tried. Al Cohn was on his deathbed, right? Al Cohn's on his deathbed. He's dying and stuff. And guess what? Oh, I gotta call him up. You know, so it's true. Bill said he calls up Al Cohn and said, "What, like, Al Cohn? What do you want? I'm dying here." He's like, he's trying to apologize. He's like, "Get this motherfucker off the phone."
Oh, that's hilarious. Wow.
I,
I heard
you know,
this funny.
it's, someone like Getz, man, is one of my favorite players. How about you?
Um, no,
No.
I I completely I completely respect him, but I never put on a Stan Getz record to listen to under my own volition. I don't think I have anything at all, and
Wow.
it's just there's something about his sound and there's something about his vibrato that bothers me.
I hear you. And that's
But
that's
that's personal. I'm not saying he's not a great player. It just doesn't resonate with me.
that's one of the beautiful things about music. I think that everyone's got a different thing. You know,
Yeah.
I love Getz's playing. I was just listening to him playing with Bill Evans the other day.
Hmm.
But I've always kind of been a fan, even when I was younger, of his melodic sense and his crave inventiveness and his weird, quirky personality and stuff. And, you know,
Great melodic sense, great event. Yeah, there's just something about the sound to me that
right.
it sounds to me. It always sounds like he has a bad read.
Yeah, I think he played like a number 4 reed with a 5-star mouthpiece or something, a really hard reed.
Yeah.
But he was doing it on purpose. But Bill Crow told me actually Stan didn't think he was that inventive of a player. He said I stole all this stuff from Al Cohn.
Wow. Really?
He really liked Al Cohn's playing style. But Bill was saying I was a big drinker too. There's a lot of drinking going on. So.
I can just imagine back in the days.
Right.
I heard this funny story when Stan knew he was sick. His manager called. Bruce Lundahl was still president of Blue Note at the time, and he
Mm-hmm.
said, "Look, Stan doesn't have much time left. He really wants his last recording to be on Blue Note. It means a lot to him, you know." So Bruce, said, "Okay, okay, let's do it." But then the manager said, "But he wants a 2-record deal."
those are some.
That's good,
Well, we've lost all the record companies and everything now, so I don't know what So.
man. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I don't think anybody does. I think that the whole live streaming and the social media thing for like the younger musicians, they don't really know what it was even like because it's already gone. So for them, they're just existing in their universe doing what they have to. But for us who kind of had a taste of that, and then the musicians before us, like Liebman, they would go in and play the Vanguard for a week. I mean, there's still a network of clubs that was there and wasn't there by the time I was in New York. So it seems like every time, every generation we go back, there's something that we're losing. But
And then the jazz clubs started closing in the 50s. Actually, I was told, rock and roll was coming in. And then after 9/11, but, the industry really fell off the cliff. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I just had one question.
mhm.
I never asked you. What, what, what was the move to Paris about? What made you move to Paris?
The move to Paris, I've been here actually now since 2003. um, I had been in New York about 10 years at that point, maybe a little longer. And I was coming over to Europe a lot to play festivals. That's where I was making the majority of my money. Like, I guess a lot of musicians. I wasn't doing a Broadway show. So to make money in New York, I was still doing weddings and stuff. And it got to the point where I really disliked doing that so much that I had a ex-girlfriend who was an actress, and one of her directors who she worked with had a painting company.
Uh,
So we would actually go and paint and renovate apartments either during the day or at night. And I would rather do that than play club date.
yeah, I hear.
So New York, basically, I was still liking it, but I was coming over here. I always loved Paris. And I was living in an apartment that was an illegal sublet, and I was going to have to find another place to live because that situation ended. So finding a new place to live in New York is always traumatic. At the same point, a friend of mine who's living here in Paris, who knew I'd always kind of talked about doing it, called me and said he was moving, and if I wanted to, he could sign the lease over to me. So I had a place here without even trying. And I got asked to join a French band by these French twin brothers, Francois and Louis Mouton. Francois is a bass player who lives in New York. Right. So I had a gig and an apartment and in Paris, which is a place I'd always want to move. I didn't have a place to live in New York. So it seems like the universe was just giving me these signals to like try it. And if I realized if I didn't like it, I could always move back, but I didn't want to regret not taking the chance. So when people ask me about it, I have to say that one of the first things is I have not had to put on a tuxedo and play a wedding in 13 years. No, 17 years now. What am I talking about? And you get much more respect as an artist, and there are more places to play, little cultural centers all over this country. And
you have health insurance? Health insurance, right?
and I have health insurance, a little teaching job, so it's quality of life. I mean, I still love New York. I miss it, and I think back of those days when I was paying dues and just making sessions with that's a huge part of who I am. But you get to a certain point in your life, and the quality of life issue becomes a little bit more important. And so I'm happy with the move I made.
That's true, man. Well, look, I hope we get to do another part because then we get to other stuff. I wanted to ask you about how long you practice and what do you do, and I think you have this amazing facility and this credible music mind, but I wanted to maybe we'll do another one since we have so much time now.
Well, thank you for that, and I'd be honored. Absolutely. Let's set another one up.
Sounds great, man. I appreciate it, and I hope everyone has some fun listening. I'm going to put it up. There's not much I got to edit here with you, so so I'll put it up there. Be careful, man. And I hope you have the. I meant to bring this out, by the way. Ho ho ho! I hope you have the best holiday you can have, man. All things considered.
Same to you, my friend. Let's stay in touch, and we'll do this again.
Okay, brother.